Good evening, Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Aboim, and welcome to Chicago.
Honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I hope I'm clear and loud enough and the lighting is good.
We see you, we hear you, and we just want to be Makir Tov. Thank you so much for taking the time and spending this time with us. I can't even imagine how busy you must be. I guess you appreciate Shabbos maybe now more than ever because people can't get a hold of you, or maybe they knock on your door. But for those who don't know, Rabbi Dr. Aaron Glatt, not just a Rav in the 5 towns at the Young Israel of Woodmere, as well as a Maggid Shir, as well as a renowned physician, someone who's an expert in infectious diseases. But he has been, for those of us who have been following, especially as a member of the RCA, I have a special measure of halakhah satov to you. He has been, since the beginning of this pandemic, really, I would say arguably in America, the go-to medical professional who has represented our community to the Postkei Hador, to the community, the Balabatim, to the medical field, and to the world at large. So just an enormous halakhah satov on behalf of the Jewish people and just a few simple Jews here in Chicago for the unbelievable achrayus that you've taken for us to watch out for our pikuach nefesh and for our matzav. So first of all, thank you for all of that, and thank you for taking the time.
It's truly my honor and pleasure to be here. I had the chus to visit Chicago and speak on a Shabbos weekend on behalf of Chicago's 311, which is a wonderful organization. I know your kollel is a nationally, worldwide renowned kollel, and Baruch Hashem, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here and to talk Torah. Baruch Hashem, we're going to have a shir tonight, so
yes,
we'll have a chance to talk Torah.
So exactly. So I think it's our opportunity to hear from you a couple of, maybe wherever you want to start, a couple of ha'aros that you were thinking about as we discussed, because you have this unique perspective of being both a Mora Hora, a Rav, someone who has the insights of the prism of Torah, and also the medicine. So maybe you want to start with a couple of the thoughts that you have been considering or dealing with in your perspective on this challenge for the last couple of weeks.
Okay, so I remember giving a shir in our shul in January. Now, January, there were 0 cases in the United States, and it just had broken out in Wuhan. And I thought, wow, this is a really interesting halachic subject to discuss between our Mincha and Shabbos shirim. And I talked about the halachos of COVID and what it would mean. And I'd like to say I blithely did it in terms of expecting this not to be the most important halacha l'maaseh shir that I have ever given. As it turns out, in retrospect, I wasn't even close to how important it was. And while I touched upon the question of achrayus of a physician, a nurse, a respiratory therapist to take care of such patients, I talked about the obligations of healthcare workers to take care of sick patients, even if it means putting themselves at risk. I talked about a number of other interesting shilas. Every one of them was true halacha l'maaseh to the umpteenth degree more than I thought it would be. And you know, this has been a very humbling experience for many physicians. The CDC has been right as often as it's been wrong. And we've learned tremendous new things about this illness literally on a daily basis. And the things that we said last week are no longer sometimes true. And we have to change. The halacha never changes, but the facts that make the halacha will change. And we've had phenomenally interesting, complex, scary, and sad halachos that had to be discarded based upon information that medicine could provide to the poskim. So the first and most important practical halacha l'maaseh suggestion came before Purim, when people were asking, what should we do about Purim? And should we change the way we would deal with Purim? And right after that, I remember it like it was yesterday. The Friday afterwards, it was Erev Shabbos, Shabbos Parshas Torah. So I called up all the Rabbanim, and I had the opportunity to speak to Gedolei Hador on all different groups. And I said, we absolutely have to close the shuls. And our shul and our community, all the shuls closed that Shabbos. Erev Shabbos morning, we had Shachris Minyan. We already were distancing at Shachris Minyan. I literally told people that were coughing, I said, you have to leave the shul now. It's pikuach nefashos. You can't cough in shul. And already Nebuch, there was already tremendous spread at that point in time, unrecognized. One of the biggest mistakes we learned is that you could have a tremendous amount of spread of COVID with asymptomatic people. Either they would remain asymptomatic without any symptoms, or they would only develop their illness days afterwards. And actually most contagious at that point in time, which is something we didn't know. There was no evidence at that point that that really was the case, or certainly it was not as commonly going to occur as it actually did. And speaking with Gedolei Hador from all different parts of the Shomer Torah Mitzvahs community, I had the opportunity to speak to the Moetzes HaGedolah. I had the opportunity to speak with the Rabbanim from Rabbi Shiva Yitzchak Elchanan from all different parts of the country. I had the chance to speak to the Rabbanim from Chicago on numerous occasions, the Gedolim there. And Baruch Hashem, we've come to the point today where, unfortunately, after so many people, Nebuch passed away and so much tragic illness, that we're reaching, Baruch Hashem, what seems to be a lull in this illness. And it's only because we closed down our Jewish lives the way we used to spending them. I don't think it was any one action. I don't think it was just the closing of the shuls. I think it was the closing of the Samachot, Nebuch, the closing of Levayas, and doing the Zoom Shivas, and doing all sorts of things like that, which are so keneged the normal way that we approach halakhah. But I always say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us how to observe the Jewish religion, not our emotions, and not this is what I want to do. And the single most important lesson that I've learned from the Gedolim, in that you serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's terms and not on our terms. We want to go to shul, but if Hashem says don't go to shul, then guess what? The halakhah says don't go to shul. And if you go to shul, you're an avarian. I mean, it's such a funny thing. People that never missed minyan in their lives, literally, they would daven every day, vasikin. They would never, ever think of missing, are now serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu by not going to minyan. People that would be the life of every simcha, and they would, go to be mitzdaref in somebody's simcha. They would never, in situations of sadness, be the first person to make the minyan in the Beis Avel. They're doing exactly HaKadosh Baruch Hu's bidding by not doing that. And that, I think, is an overriding principle that we can learn from COVID, and that we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu based upon what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do. In our society, we sometimes have people that think they know better than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the way the Jewish religion should be served, and not what Shulchan Aruch says, because we know better. After all, we're modern, we're very sophisticated, we're very smart. And what did the rabbis know? And it's been very humbling to see that the rabbis know quite a bit, and that if the halakhah says to do something, you do it. If the halakhah says you're not allowed to do it, despite your emotional desires to do it, you're going keneged the ritzon of Hashem. I heard a great Rosh Hashiva tell me that he wasn't going to be at shul for the yard side of his mother. I missed the yard side of my father. This year should be an aliyah for his neshama, for both my parents, alayhim hashalom. And he said, I don't feel bad for a second that I'm not going to shul on the yard site of my parents. This a Gadol Yisrael told me this. He said, I don't feel bad at all. I'm doing what God wants me to do. He doesn't want me to say Kaddish today. If I go to a shul and make a minyan, which he could do, he snap his fingers, he'd have 9 other people in his house in a second, despite the risk. He said, that's not what Hashem wants. The most interesting practical halacha l'maisa that was the scariest halacha l'maisa, which I'm glad that I spoke with Shechter Shlit about this, and he put out a tshuva about this, and I spoke with a number of different leaders of hospitals, and it didn't come to pass. But the scariest halacha l'maisa question was, what happens if we run out of respirators? And Baruch Hashem, it never came to pass. I'm not aware of any situation in the United States where they involuntarily took somebody off a respirator to give it to somebody else. But we came this close to doing that. In New York, at a major medical center, they actually had to put 2 patients on a single respirator. They ran out of respirators. That's how close we came to doing this. And Baruch Hashem, it's a very dangerous thing to do, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu's given us a lot of technological insights, and they were able to do it at their institution safely. But that brought about the most interesting, terrible question. Are you allowed to go and take somebody off a respirator who society says is not going to live, and his life is not as precious as a 25-year-old guy with 6 kids who comes in who's going to win the next Nobel Prize? So secular ethics say, yes, you take the 85-year-old guy off the respirator and you give it to the 25-year-old guy. Halakhah calls that ritzicha. Halakhah calls that murder. Not with a viciousness to it, not like a guy in an alley taking out a sledgehammer, Rahman al-Islam, and knocking you on the head. We understand it's coming from a good place, but halacha doesn't come from a good place in our hearts. Halacha comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we believe very strongly that HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows an awful lot better than the best ethicists and the best doctors. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you're not allowed to take somebody off a respirator, no matter what, and it's ritzicha if you do, so then you're not allowed to do this. And there were hospitals that published guidelines and said, the ethicists, the secular ethicists said, we're going to decide, we're going to play God. We're going to say, we don't think this 95-year-old guy is going to survive on the respirator. It's a bracha levatala, and therefore we're going to take him off the respirator. Now, I'm not suggesting you could do this, but if the family agrees to that, halacha doesn't say you could do that. The family agrees to that, that's secular ethics. They do nebuch, they do this all the time. It's called a terminal wean, and they voluntarily say that this guy has chosen to give up his life. In halacha, it's absolutely not allowed. In secular ethics, it's considered a laudable thing to stop their suffering and voluntarily take somebody off a respirator. We don't agree with that halacha, certainly, but secular ethics allow it. But secular ethics doesn't allow that you can involuntarily take somebody off. The family's shrieking and screaming, keep him on the respirator. He's alive, not even a question that he's dead. Leaving the brain death question aside. He's 100% alive by United States law. All the 50 states say he would be alive. So no secular court, no hospital would take somebody like that involuntarily off a respirator. But because of COVID, they were actually going to secularly paskin to take such a person off a respirator. And I discussed it with a number of leaders of the secular world. Sometimes there was a das yochid on this. And I went to Rav Shechter Shlita wrote a tshuva, and he clearly said, you're absolutely not allowed to do this. And Baruch Hashem, in the discourse of Rav Shechter, we never had that question come up as a halacha l'maisa. But to me, that was one of the scariest things. And we actually solicited the Jewish community, purchased and donated many respirators to the New York hospitals to prevent this from becoming Rahman al-Islam, a real shaila.
So how did that question unfold? How do you confer with these people? You had like Zoom calls or conference calls, physicians. How does it work?
So in the hospitals, I'm part of a large system. These are conversations that never go on as part of normal hospital policy. You have the senior staff deciding what we're going to do. It came very close in many hospitals for it being a reality that we would run out of respirators. We normally have about 20, 30 people a day on a respirator. At the height of COVID, we had 100 patients on a respirator. That's 4 or 5 times above our normal capacity. And we run a big hospital. That's a lot of respirators normally. And we had to buy respirators. We had to beg and borrow respirators. And Baruch Hashem, we never ran out of respirators. We almost came close to running out of respiratory therapists and doctors to manage these patients. They all normally require an ICU. Our hospital, basically the entire hospital became an ICU. The staff, they really did unbelievable work at every hospital, not just my hospital. Every hospital that was in the epicenter of this COVID epidemic did unbelievable work, tremendous chesed, ben adam l'chaveiro, and the risk that the people put themselves up. They can't be thanked enough, all the people on the front lines. But the hospitals have to make decisions. How are you going to take care of scarce resources? I was on a conference call today where I was giving a talk about remdesivir. And one of the questions posed to me, this is from the Infectious Disease Society of America. So one of the questions posed to me on this symposium was, how did I ethically decide who would get remdesivir, a certain drug that's somewhat beneficial, and we don't have enough of the drug? So I outlined how we went and did it. And there are halakhic principles which I follow in making up our policies, and that there are appropriate ethical considerations. Baruch Hashem, the halacha and the ethical concerns almost always coincide. Again, as I said, the halacha is beautiful, and invariably, secular ethics agree with the halacha with some exceptions. And we gave it out fairly. We put together a plan that didn't not allow anybody to get it based upon age or their gender, race, or color, or anything like that, obviously. And we gave it out fairly based upon medical criteria, which is what the halacha says you have to do in a situation when you have a scarce resource. And you give it to the person who's there. You don't save it for somebody that may come in a week later. And you don't tell an 80-year-old you can't have it because you're 80 years old and we're going to save it for 20-year-olds. But If the 80-year-old it won't work on, so then you don't give it to an 80-year-old. If it won't work on a 20-year-old, you don't give it to a 20-year-old. So we based our criteria on fairness, on equitable distribution, and on medical and halachic principles. And that's something that we should be very proud of, that we can be God-fearing Jews and we can follow the halakhah and at the same time be hopefully good physicians and follow what secular society expects and demands of us as well.
It's an amazing Kiddush Hashem, la'inei ha'amen, like the standard and the moral clarity that you can provide by thinking about the halakhah in a way that you can convey it to the general medical profession is just extraordinary.
Well, my Rabbeim always taught me something very, very important, and that is that it's a lot more difficult to be a observant Jew outside the Beis Medrash than it is inside the Beis Medrash. They say the family is Vilna Gaon. He was once asked, he was being given Musar by one of the Magids, and he's told him before Yom Kippur, "No, give me Musar." He said, "What's the big deal to be the Vilna Gaon in the Beis Medrash? Let's see you be the Vilna Gaon out in the real world." He said, No kunst. I don't have to go out into the real world. I'll just stay in the Beis Medrash. But for many of us, we're not the Vilna Gaon, and we have to go out into the real world for various reasons. And again, it's harder to make a Kiddush Hashem sometimes in the real world. It's harder to be Torah Shalom and Mitzvahs in the real world. And Mitzvah Hashem, we should all be zocheh to do that. We should all be zocheh to be in the Beis Medrash as much as possible too.
Yes, absolutely. So you mentioned before how you had the opportunity to interact with many poskim, and in dealing with poskim, how do you see your own and their process of integrating medical knowledge, right? The current, as you mentioned before, the question of how much do we even know, to the extent that we do know, medical knowledge and halakhah. How do you make that synthesis? How do you bring those two together? How do you apply the principles of halakhah to an ever-changing situation that maybe people, even medical professionals, don't know everything about at any given time?
So it's a very good point. I think we always have to be humble. We always have to realize that we don't know everything. And I always was taught the most important Rashi in all of Gemara is the 26 places where Rashi says, Lo yadati, I don't know. That's the essence of Rashi. If it was me writing Rashi, I would have skipped those 26 places. I don't have to let the whole world know I didn't know. They'll figure it out, but I don't have to tell them. So Rashi says, I don't know. That's the most important lesson. And we have been humbled by COVID. There are so many things that we did wrong. But I have to point out, the halakhah says you follow the mumcha at that point in time. In the days of the Gemara, they asked the local doctors in the Academy of Pumbedisa and the Medical Academy, the New England Journal of Pumbedisa, right? That they would ask them, what is the medical opinion? Now, we might laugh at it today. We might say, leeches? No, we don't treat that with leeches. What? Phlebotomy? We're gonna take out all your blood. They say that George Washington died because of being over phlebotomized. They took out too much blood from George Washington. The father of the country got horrible medical care because he got medical care. And there are authors have stated that you were far better off not going to the doctor until maybe the 1900s, maybe 1850s or so. You were far better off not going to the doctor. You're more likely to die at the hands of the doctor than be healed by the doctor. So the halacha was, even back in Babel, in Surah and Pumbedisa and Ardai, you follow the doctor. If the doctor is wrong, but that's the medical circumstances in those days, the halacha says you follow the doctor. He's the mumcha. And we have been wrong at times with COVID. We've been right sometimes too, but we've been wrong. The bottom line is, you have to follow the mumcha. And only the mumcha, only the expert has a right to an opinion. Rav Shach the Shlita always says, not everybody's entitled to opinion. And again, it's funny because in a democratic society like ours, everybody is entitled to an opinion. And Rav Shach the Shlita says no. I remember once hearing there was a machlokas between the Shach and the Taz. And one of the students piped up and he says, I think that the Shach is right. And the Rebbe said, I don't think the Taz is losing any sleep. It's not everybody's entitled to an opinion. The Shach and the Taz are entitled to an opinion. The fact that I agree with one of them doesn't change anything around. So you have to listen to the experts. And the experts are the CDC, the National Institute of Infectious Diseases and Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the National Institutes of Health, the local mumchas, the infectious disease experts, the epidemiologists, and they'll be wrong some of the time. But if you take a consensus opinion, so then the halacha says you close a shul based upon what the doctors say. You machal Shabbos based upon what the doctors say. And that's what we did. And when I presented all of these shilas to the Gedolim, I always presented them from the medical facts that we had the best of our ability to present to them. Where there was disagreement, I tried to present both sides of the disagreement. I would give my own personal opinion if I felt strongly about something. But again, the other great thing I always thought from my Rabbi was when Abai and Rabbi have an argument, you'll often find Abai stumps Rabbi and Rabbi gives the answer, right? He shlogged him up and he could go home and say I won, but he says, no, this was the answer you should have said. You won't find that in a court of law. You don't find the attorney giving the other guy his side. He's only too happy that he pulled one over the other side. In halakhah, it's not like that. They want the amitus, they want the right answer. So I would try to present as best as I could both sides. If I thought one side was more correct, I would say so. Sometimes the post can listen to me. Sometimes the post can listen to other doctors. That's fine. There are differences of opinion. A mumcha can argue with another mumcha. Sometimes we go by the majority. Sometimes you do svara, which seems to be more logical. When in doubt, sometimes you go l'chumra. Another major principle I learned from the Gedolim was you go l'chumra in pikuach nefashos. Rav Shechter Shlita said this. Rav Willich Shlita said this. I heard this from the great. It's so sad to say the Novominsker Zatzal. Zechat Tzaddik Kosh L'Bracha. I had discussed to speak with him in the Moetzes Agdola right before Aguda closed all the shuls, and I hear it in my head. I had discussed to hear this from the Novominsker himself. Zechat Tzaddik Kosh L'Bracha. He said, "Shchicha hezeka." It's likely that there's going to be damage over here. The Torah is not going to be Megan, Shlicha Ezera. You can't rely upon Shluchei Mitzvah, Einan Nizakin. You can't rely upon the fact that you're doing a mitzvah. You can't rely upon the fact that Tefillah B'Tzibah is so unbelievably important. You can't rely upon that when it's common that it's going to be a disaster. I heard from one of our Rebbeim. He said, I remember him saying this, if you're on the top of the Empire State Building and you hear downstairs somebody needs a Hatzalah, and you're a Hatzalah member, so you got to take the elevator. You can't jump out the window and say, well, I'm doing the work of Hashem. Nothing will happen to me. You're going to splatter on the ground. So this is shchicha zeka. When you have COVID running rampant, when you have people nebuch, there's so many gedolim in Yisrael. They were certainly worthy of shmira from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu had in mind. There's so many good people, nebuch, who passed away from COVID, who probably got it at a wedding, who probably got it at a bris or a simcha or a nebuch, a levaya, or in shul, at Purim, at a mesiba. We don't understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu does things. But when he tells us this is the medical information, now halachically act upon it, so then the Gedolim have to paskin, and the Gedolim unanimously paskin, close all the shuls. The Gedolim were all maskim, pikuach nefashos machmir on the brisker Rav. His shita was you go to chumrah. He once was mekel in Hilchah Shabbos. Somebody said, "Oh, brisker Rav's mekel in Shabbos." He says, "No, I'm machmir on pikuach nefashos." So we have to be so careful when it comes to pikuach nefashos, which is why some people have been much more hesitant to come back to minyanim, because there still is COVID around. Baruch Hashem, it should stay that way. We've seen such a marked decrease in almost all areas, especially in our communities. But I can't say that there's zero COVID in our communities. So there are those that are saying machmir for bikuach nefashos, delay going back, and that's why the opinion of the RCA, Rav Shechter Shlita, Rav Willich Shlita, Rav Asher Weiss Shlita, Rav David Cohen Shlita, they all paskin to delay, even though the governor said it's okay. The Gedolim told me you can be more machmir than the governor, you can't be more mekel than the governor. So we decided to be more machmir. Other Gedolim said no. If the governor says it's okay, they felt the risk was acceptable. I have no problems if a global basis is psak upon the medical opinion he gets, and people sometimes are upset. How come we have two different guidelines? It doesn't bother me at all. We have two different halachas for almost everything in terms of this machlokes. This one says you can do it this way. This one says you can't do it this way. We have a principle. Both are correct. As strange as that may sound, both are correct. You follow your Rebbe. You have to follow your Rebbe all the time. You can't pick and choose. The Rebbe's mekel here, I'll follow that Rebbe. This Rebbe's mekel here, I'll follow this Rebbe. Then you're a fool. Then you're a fool. If you go l'chumrah all the time, you're also a fool. You pick a Rebbe, I say l'charav, and you follow your Rav, and you're doing the right thing. The fact that somebody else is doing something totally different is okay. That's the halachic process.
So for the average person, let's say, so they're following what their shul, rabbi, and their community guidelines are giving them. And how do people think about this unfolding now as we return? Is this just, now, okay, society has decided we can open up because we have enough ventilators? Or is this a reflection of the risk actually decreasing, which changes, those are two different cheshbonos in terms of halakhah.
So I think society uses the first characteristic that you said, and halakhah uses the second. What do I mean by that? Society has to balance the political, the economic, the other factors. They have to make decisions that, we could handle a medical crisis if it occurs. One of the most important things that the hospitals, again, I speak mostly from New York, so I'm intimately familiar with that, but I believe all the parts of the country where their state and local governments are making the same decisions, they'll open up, they'll allow businesses and other parts of society to open up as long as they have enough capacity. Should things get worse, we could handle. One of the things that almost happened was we almost were overwhelmed. This great United States, a Medina Shel Chesed, an unbelievably kind country for our people and for all people. We almost overwhelmed our medical system. We came, I think, 1 week. If we had closed 1 week later, I think we would have overwhelmed our system because we were at the precipice. We could not have handled another week of increase. We would have been overextended. And who knows what would have happened. And it wasn't just my hospital, it was every hospital. We were all to the max. So society said, we'll open up when we know that, Rahman al-Islam, if things get bad, you can handle it. Halakhah doesn't take that approach. Halakhah doesn't say there's ever an acceptable loss of life. Halakhah has principles that says you have to be machmer pikuach nefashos. It doesn't mean you can't cross the street. Otherwise, how could you ever take a shower? You'll slip in the bathtub. How could you ever drive a car to shul? You could, Rahman al-Islam, get into an accident. So Allah has principles called dosh bei rabin. What people accept is a normal risk of life. Yes, some people cross against the red, right? We shouldn't do that. But if you think it's safe, you're allowed to cross against the red. You're not over an issa deraisa of the shmar to motis nafshel seichel if you cross at the red. If you're crossing a busy highway, you close your eyes and say shir malos and cross, then you're over an issa deraisa of killing yourself. You're gonna Rahman al-Islam commit suicide. You can't do that. But you are allowed to take what halakhah and society together decide is an acceptable risk. So we have to be more machmir than the government. The government may say, we think an acceptable risk would be 10 deaths because society has to open up. Society can make those decisions. Halakhah is going to say we don't accept 10 deaths. That's not an acceptable risk. And we'll stay at home and not daven b'tzibur. We'll have Zoom shivas. We'll have levayas with nebuch, just the immediate family in their own separate units, not even necessarily a minyan Rahman al-Islam, because that's pikuach nefashos. And that's the difference, I think, between a secular opening and a halachic opening.
So then how do we figure out, because let's say historically, halakhah hasn't had usually the distinctions, let's say 0.5% chance, 0.25% chance, right? Once we're talking, in halakhah, I think in the Beis Medrash, we talk about miyat hamatzoya, 10%, 7.5%, mishkanos Yaakov, elef alfei alav nechasim. Like at this point, how do you as a physician and the poskim figure out, well, what is that threshold where we say, okay, that is an acceptable risk for halakhah?
So it's interesting, as you so accurately pointed out, you don't find too many numbers in halakhah. We find concepts. We don't find 10%, 5%. Some poskim, some of the Risha Achronim have tried to put numbers on certain things. But we say, like you pointed out, a majority, a likely minority, something that's really unlikely. We deal with concepts, and it's very hard. People also mistakenly think that when a doctor says there's a 12% chance of this happening, he really knows what he's talking about. We make up numbers all the time. Now, I don't mean that in such a horrible way. We'll quote a study. Now, the study, there was 69.2% of the people in this study, because that's a mathematical number. There were 1,000 patients, and this many happened, and we say 69.2%. Now, that was true for that paper, for that study. Does that mean that everybody has a 69.2% chance of surviving with this medication or getting this complication? No, they're round numbers, they're ideas. So when I would present this to the poskim, when anybody would present this to the poskim, they give as best as they can an estimation of what the risk is. And the poskim have to decide based upon what we tell them, is this something that halakhah sanctions, or is this something that would say, no, I don't think the halakhah would sanction this. And that's why you can have different opinions. And it's often based upon the fact that we just can't put it into such hard numbers. I don't think anybody could say that if we open up when the governor says to open up, the risk is X. If we open up 2 weeks later, the risk is X minus Y. I don't think we could say that. And in fact, my personal opinion was we can't say that. And I can't say that it's more dangerous today than next week or the week afterwards, or that it's actually less dangerous. Maybe in 2 weeks something will happen and it was actually less dangerous now. There's no way to say that. So some of it is what I call guesstimation. You do your best assessment. A mumcha has to, as best as he can, assess the situation, and the poskim as best as they can. Sometimes there's a shikol hadas, there's a certain evaluation, a certain estimation that the poskim have to do. And if your philosophy is, when in doubt, I'm going to be machmir and pikuach nefashos. So if you do that to the nth degree, so then there are great Rosh Yeshiva said, don't open up until Rosh Hashanah.
Really?
Rav Twersky Shlita said, don't open up to Rosh Hashanah. Now, I think that's a das yochid. Not that many poskim felt like that. But that's not to say that he's wrong. Rav Shechter said you should publicize his psak halakhah. On the other hand, the Muetzes didn't feel that way. The Muetzes felt at this point in time, it's acceptable to open up. And again, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. I certainly am not, I don't think anybody's qualified to decide between these great gedolei poskim how to paskin. All we can do is present to them the shaila, and each posek paskins, I follow my poskim, X follows his poskim, Y follows his poskim, and Baruch Hashem, that's the metrics that we go and paskin halachic shailas.
That's I think an important perspective for everybody. But I wanted to shift for a second as someone who is in the community, who's a person who connects with regular, ordinary people and also operates in an institutional sphere. How have you seen this play out, not just on a macro level, but in halachic questions that relate to just people, just the regular balabatim, either who you know from the community or shilas that have come up that you've discussed with poskim? Because it's one thing to talk about it in an abstract, and then there's the other issue of just the actual person, the people who are being affected.
So there are unlimited numbers of shilas that people have asked to me, to other people. The great poskim have been up all the time trying to answer shilas from all over the world. I get a lot of shilas. I get a lot of questions. I'm not in the great poskim category. I get a lot of questions for whatever the reason. And some of them are very simple to answer, and some of them are unbelievably difficult to answer. But to every individual person, that's the most important question. What seems like a very silly or trite question, to that person, that's something that they need to know the answer to. And the job of anybody, a local Rav certainly, because he deals with it on a daily basis. The Gedolim, Rav Moshe Feinstein, when he writes the Igros Moshe, he's not writing klutz kashas. He gets the creme de la creme. If it filters up to Rav Moshe, so then Rav Moshe writes, the tshuva for all times. Rav Moshe doesn't get the question, I forgot to say Yalav Yavo, what do I do? So that's the local Rav. So you get so many important questions that aren't to be written down for all eternity. What should I do? My husband's not feeling well, but he wants to go to Minyan. These aren't questions that you need to write an Igros Moshe on, but they're very, very important questions. And everybody needs to ask their questions. People shouldn't be afraid to ask a question. And their local Rav is the place where they should ask it. Their local doctor is the place to ask it. Not every question needs to go to Rav Moshe Feinstein. And everybody needs to feel comfortable making a relationship with their local Rav. The one bad thing about all these unbelievable internet Torah opportunities, the only bad thing about it is that it somehow diminishes the connection that people have with their local Rav. When I was growing up, you went to the rabbi's class. That was it. There weren't 9,000 choices. The rabbi gave his Sunday night class. My father schlepped me along, and that's where you went. That was the class. The Shabbos afternoon Gemara class. That was the class. He didn't have 900 options. Most people, when I was growing up, didn't have a base medrash that they went to learn with the chavrusa. It was a different world. Today, I want to listen to Rav Willig, I want to listen to Rav Shechter, I want to listen to Rabbi Brand, I want to listen to whoever I want to. You click, and all of a sudden, you're in their base medrash, and you hear the unbelievable sweetness of their Torah. But it loses something by being in the same room as your local rabbi, who you develop a relationship with. And the most important thing is to have a relationship with your local Rav that you can ask a shaila to, a personal shaila to. The person's never having shalom bayis problems. The person's having a period of review questions. The person's having nida shailas. These are very intimate, personal questions. problems with children, problems with neighbors. You can't ask for Moshe Feinstein every one of these guys. Of course, Moshe Feinstein knows the answer, but he doesn't know you. And some of these shilas are so totally, they're so dependent upon the individual person and the relationship that he has with his spouse, with the children, with the neighbors, with the shul. And the local Rav is the most qualified. I remember hearing a story of Shlomo Zalman. Somebody once went to Shlomo Zalman's Zatzal. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he was the Posek Hador in Eretz Yisrael. And somebody went to him and asked him a shaila. And Shlomo Zalman got up from the chair and he started to walk. And the person said, I really stumped Shlomo Zalman. Shlomo Zalman motions to him, come to me, comes to the window. He points out the window and he says, you see that house over there? That's where your Rav lives. Ask your Rav the shaila. That's the greatness of Shlomo Zalman. This is a shaila that should be asked to the local Rav. But if you don't have a relationship with the local Rav, it's very hard to suddenly come up to him the first time and ask him a very personal shaila.
But one of the things you're touching on now is how the halachic process, how the Ribbono Shel Olam's expectations of us include both the objective, the strict legal measures, but then there are also other factors that are intertwined with this, and very often, perhaps you're alluding to the mental health, the emotional, the psychological elements of some of these questions. Were there questions that you dealt with or that you are dealing with as a physician, as an infectious disease person, that have also involved mental health components?
Unfortunately, many times. One of the most difficult questions I had, and I still don't know if I did the right answer to this. Nebuch, a young man in the community, a frum guy, passed away from COVID. And the hospital has a no visitation policy. All hospitals have a no visitation policy. It's dangerous, Nebuch. It's dangerous for the visitors to come in. And the family was allowed to come in, Nebuch, to see their loved one after the patira. And there were, Nebuch, 4 little children. And the question was, should the children go up to see their father, Nebuch, in this situation? And the mother went up, the wife went up. And she asked me, what should we do with the children? And I didn't think the children should go up to see their father in that situation. He'd been on a respirator, Nebuch. He wasn't in a good position. And I had to make a decision to recommend not to have the children go up. And I know it may not have been what the children thought they wanted at that moment in time, but I just thought it wasn't the best situation for them to see their father, Nebuch, in that situation. It was so emotionally difficult for them already. I didn't want them to have the last picture of their father, to see him in that very, very difficult situation. A person who Nebuch passed away in a respirator doesn't look anything like what they looked in real life. They're often swollen, and there's not appropriate for the conversation right now. And I decided not to let them go up. I would have let them go up if the mother had insisted, but I think she made the right decision with me. And it was so difficult for them. And Nebuch, there have been other cases like that. The no visitation policy, which is medically necessary, is one of the most difficult things for families to go through. The shivas that we have are some of the most difficult things for families to go through. I remember one mother, Nebuch, she lost her husband. They're married for 60 years. She said, I can't even mourn properly. It's so terrible that he's dead, but I can't even have a normal shiva. I can't even have a normal grief period. People are coming to me on a Zoom. You don't know what a Zoom was. They're Zooming me. I can't be with my family. It's so tragic that the things that normally provide a tremendous amount of nechama to people, the shiva experience, nobody should have to know of it until their parents are 120. Nebuch, I've lost both my parents. The shiva is a comfort. It's an opportunity for me to have sat with my siblings and reminisce about our wonderful parents, to be in the company of people to comfort you, and just to be not alone. Imagine Nebuch, a widow, married for 60 years. She was sitting shiva alone. How difficult is that? And those are some of the tragic things. You talk about people in isolation. Nebuch, they didn't lose anybody, but they're in isolation. How many people had to have a Seder alone? They chose to have a Seder alone because it was just dangerous. Then the Baruch Hashem, they're healthy enough. They can make their own Seder. But a 75-year-old woman to make a Seder by herself, those are some of the most difficult things to do. And I actually had paskin in many situations. I said, take a risk. This is a reasonable thing. Everybody was healthy. They'd been self-quarantined for 2 weeks and all the things. I said, I think you could take a risk. And they said, no, they didn't want to take the risk. I said, could I guarantee them there was no risk? I couldn't guarantee that there was no risk. And they chose isolation sometimes, which is such a difficult thing. And that's been one of the the hidden or silent tragedies of this illness, that there is so much isolation. As much as people have to be in a physical isolation, everybody has to make every effort that there shouldn't be an emotional isolation. The call out, the technology that we have is wonderful. It can be used for wonderful purposes. To have the joy of seeing my grandchildren. I haven't hugged any of my grandchildren, but the joy of at least seeing them from a distance, sometimes with technology, sometimes across the street. I can walk to them and at least wave to them. But it can be very isolating for people that don't have that luxury. Sometimes an 80-year-old person may not be so technologically savvy that they can figure out the Zoom. It's just something that they may not be able to do. And with all the different technologies that we have to keep in touch, the good old phone call, the knocking by somebody's window and saying, "How are you doing? Can I get you some food? Do you need shopping?" These are so critically important. We have a chance to do so much chesed. Maybe that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said. You're spending too much time in shul learning. Start doing a little chesed. Maybe that's the message from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rav Shechter Shlita always would say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to bring the Mashiach with the midah of Avram. We end off the Shemona Esrei with Magen Avraham. He said, you have the three pillars. Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim. He says the end is Gemilas Chasadim. The Mashiach is going to come because of Gemilas Chasadim. So maybe this is the Aschal to the Geula, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to make us do more chesed. Maybe that was the plan.
Amazing. So maybe just to pick up on something you just mentioned in that conversation, which I know is very sensitive in the community, is the question of public policy versus individual circumstance. The community has a certain policy, but you alluded to the fact that, well, I have a particular circumstance. This child has been in this circumstance. This parent has been in this place. How do people navigate their own personal circumstance, which at times is in consonance and maybe at times is not in consonance with the public policy? Do people always have to say, look, if that's the public policy, or or is there a way for individual cases? And how does it become that if we say, okay, individual cases are fine, then every year, Chazal, the Gemara says, they didn't tell you for a year why they made the Gezerah, because they were every Chaim Yankas, well, not by me. How do we navigate that?
I was asked probably 5 times in the last hour before I got on with you exactly that halacha l'maisa question. I wish I was being magazine. I get this question multiple times a day. This situation has come up. I know you said this, but what about this situation? And very frequently, I will say, in your situation, you're the Yotzei min haklal, but you can't publicly state certain things because people will not understand them. And that's, as you just so appropriately said, sometimes there's a low plug. Sometimes we say, this is the rule. No, we start giving reasons, everybody knows why, and therefore they don't have to follow it. But when you're dealing with a one-on-one, you can have halakhah of a morin kane. The halakhah could be for this individual, and this is what we're telling you to do, but we're not going to announce this for everybody else. And sometimes I will literally tell people, this is a personal, private psak for you that's not to be disseminated. I give you a ma'aseh shai, it just happened. So somebody, the child is unfortunately not doing so well. And the child is becoming emotionally problematic because they're not dealing well with the isolation, because the parents are very strict and say, no, you can't go play with your friends. And the grandparents could be a wonderful eitzah in this situation to help out. And everybody's been self-quarantined. Nobody's been sick. They've been very careful. And I said, we're at the stage, Baruch Hashem, the levels are so low that I would say, yes, I think you can mix, even though I'm not yet at the stage to saying, I think we'll be there soon, that everybody can pick 1 or 2 couples and begin to expand their bubbles, to expand who they're, getting, socially close with as opposed to socially distanced with. We're getting to that point, Be'ezus Hashem, but I haven't yet been ready to make the proclamation, go for it, everybody. But I am much quicker to say, in certain select situations, sometimes dependent upon the medical facts of the case, it's much easier to say 2 people can mix if everybody's healthy and well. Maybe they have antibodies, which is not an absolute, but that can be a factor. They had COVID already. They didn't have COVID. There are many factors that can go into making an individual psak as opposed to a communal psak. So, yeah, I think that each case must always be individualized. I mean, the halacha recognizes that. In certain hilchos of treifus and hilchos v'isa v'heter, it depends on how rich they are. We have a rule that If you're a rich person, it's treif. If you're a poor person, it's kosher. And once it's kosher for the rich person too. So we do take into account circumstances. That's why I said before, I say l'charav, your local Rav knows your financial situation. If you go to online Rabbi Google and you say, what's the halakhah? He's going to quote Shulchan Aruch that says it's asur. But he's not going to quote the part that says, if it's a hefsed meruba and you're a poor person and this and that, so then, right, the famous shiloh, somebody asked the Rav, can you be yotzei dalit kosos with milk? So what did the Rav do? He made sure that they sent over money so they could have fleishos. They weren't able to afford fleishos, so they're asking about milk. They're eating milk at the Seder. So obviously, they don't have enough food for fleishos. So you got to ask these types of questions.
Incredible. We're so appreciative. I know it's getting late. Maybe if you have either an insight or a message or some guidance that it's important for people to know at this time, from your perspective, for those of us listening in Chicago, what is it something that we should know at this juncture? We're post-Pesach, we're post-Shavuos. They're starting to be opening up, but it's going to be gradual. The people over 60, 65, 70 are not necessarily going to be coming. So we're dealing with every situation as it comes. So what are your thoughts, chizuk, ideas, insight that we should be thinking about at this time?
Okay, so I think it's a great question and a good way to end. So we happen to be in the period of time right now of the Yemei Tashlumim, right? Everybody knows this. This is the most well-known halakhah because we don't say tachlan, according to at least many. We don't say tachlan now. I find that people may not be kiyum in all the shas, but everybody's a baki in the hilchos tachlan. And everybody knows the days better than any rav, which days you're absolutely not allowed to say tachlan, even though there's 17 opinions say you can't say tachlan, but they all know that machmir opinion not to say tachlan. Separate discussion for another time. We're in the Yemei Tashlumim to make up for Shavuos. So I would say to everybody, this is such a hashkafically good period of time to talk about Tashlumim. We're going to come back to shuls, but there are many people that aren't, either because Nebuch, they're no longer with us. They're sick. We have people still in respirators in the hospital. We have people Nebuch that are too weak still to come back to shul. We have people that are too scared to come back to shul. But it's Yemei Tashlumim. This is a chance for everybody to make up for something that they didn't do so well. Not necessarily through any fault of our own. None of us have been in minyan for months. I know so many people that never missed the minyan. They never missed davening bisman in the minyan. Never mind with a minyan. They would make sure they always made the Magen Avram's man, not only the Vilna Gaon's man. They're people that were so medakdek on their shiurim, on their minyan, and they didn't go. So now we have Yemei Tashlumim. Now's a chance to make up for it. Some people have told me they actually felt they davened better without a minyan. That doesn't mean you shouldn't go back to minyan, but that means that let's not lose all the good things. There's so many people who have done so much chesed. Don't say, well, COVID's over, which it's not. Chesed out the window, back to work. There are so many opportunities for us to continue this tashlumim to make up for deficiencies in the past. We have done so many things by rote. Maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, stop doing it by rote. Think about it. I had a theoretical shaila. Do we make a shechianu when we come back to shul? So I'm not passing this halakhah l'maisa, but you make a shechianu because you're unbelievably happy. Shechianu v'kiyamanu v'giyanu lezman hazeh. How many of us are going to be really, really happy to come back to minyan tomorrow night? Or we're going to say, I got used to, sleeping in late and davening in my pajamas. Is it a shechiyanu? Do we really look forward to this? When we go back to shul, is our attitude in shul going to be, well, when's the kiddush? When's the rabbi speech going to finally be over? Or is it going to be, wow, I haven't heard Amen Yeheshmei Rabbah. I'm going to concentrate with such intensity and answer Baruch Hu and Kedusha with a new intensity. I'm going to see the people in shul. I may not give them a big hug, but I'm going to ask about them. I've missed you. What's going on in your life? Do you have a place to stay and go? Which in the past, maybe it was just so busy. Maybe this is an opportunity to make up. Yemei Tashlumim is a make-up period of time. It's a do-over, right? When we were kids, a do-over, right? You're playing ball, it's a do-over. Yeah, it's a do-over. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, reset, right? You press the reset button. And it may be our tefillah wasn't so good. We had a chance to think about it, maybe do it a little bit differently, and start again. if we maybe didn't say korbanos, and now we've been saying korbanos because we had a little bit extra time. Well, don't stop. Don't come back into your bad habit of saying, I start from Yishtabach. No, the davening starts at the beginning. Maybe we can make our davening a little bit better. Maybe, wow, all these Zoom shir, we have a virtual-based medrash. Well, I'm going to keep up some of that, all of it, more of it. I'm going to try to do all the things that we did good. I've been talking to my parents every day, those that are so blessed to have their parents because they're worried about them. They don't see them. Don't let that stop. This Yemei Tashlumim, it could be a makeup period for a whole lot of sins, a whole lot of things that we maybe didn't do so well beforehand. We have a pause here. We have a reset. We have a do-over. Let's take advantage of it. And B'ezus Hashem, God is going to say, wow, I gave you this COVID. We don't know why, but it worked. God's going to say, what I wanted to accomplish from COVID-19 has been accomplished. And the only way we can do that is if we strengthen ourselves in the three pillars that I alluded to before, in our Torah, in our avodah, in our davening, in our gemilas chasadim, in our kindness to each other.
Amen. Halavai will be zocha to that. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give you and your entire mishpacha, children, grandchildren, everybody good health, nachas, hatzlacha, siyata d'shmaya, the insight, the wisdom to be able to make those difficult decisions, both the medical decisions and the halachic decisions, the technical decisions and the emotional decisions, to be the right ones for the appropriate time, everyone in its right circumstance. Thank you for the time. Thank you for sharing in the Chiddush and your insights and your chizuk. We so appreciate it. It's been terrific and inspiring. And we thank you so much. We give you a bracha for continued hatzlacha.
Amen. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. And may you continue all the wonderful work that you do with your kollel, and may the city of Chicago continue to be the second city. We like it as the second city. You should continue as the second city.
Amen. Baruch Hashem, we're so proud of what we have, our kollel, our rabbanim, our community. We are glad that you were able to be the first of this special series. In Mirz Hashem, we're going to be inviting another guest next week, someone you know. You see here, Mirz Hashem next Thursday night. I think it should say Thursday. Yes, it says Tuesday, but it should say Thursday. Next Thursday night, Mirz Hashem with Rabbi Dr. Eddie Reichman, a beloved colleague of yours, who will be speaking about Kol HaKovid, pandemics in rabbinic literature. So that'll be next Thursday, Mirz Hashem, followed by Rabbi Dr. David Shabtai. So this is a series of opportunities that we have as a community to realize the interplay between halakhah and medicine, and see how we can continue to be inspired to make a Kiddush Hashem in our lives and to be mechazik each other. So thank you, Rabbi Dr. Glatt. Be matzliach. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope everybody stays well in Mirz Hashem. Everybody should be healthy. We look forward to learning together.